Okay, looks like we've got a good group, so we'll go ahead and get started here. I know a couple other people might trickle in, but again, thank you for joining today's webinar, which is Advantages of a Prepaid Lease for Solar and Battery. We're going to talk a lot about what a prepaid lease is today, among other things. We'll have some live Q&A, and yeah, just want to thank you again for joining. We'll jump right into it. I'll take a moment now just to introduce myself before getting into what we'll cover today. For anyone who's not joined before or who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Gabe Amy. I'm our Chief Marketing Officer here at Cape Fear Energy. I see a lot of familiar names, perhaps some customers, people we've worked with in the past or have joined a webinar before. For anyone else, we're located here in Wilmington, North Carolina. We do solar, battery, EV charging systems, among other things, as we've kind of rebranded to Cape Fear Energy Systems over the last several months. And we operate really about a 3.5 to 4 hour radius of Wilmington, serving both homeowners, business owners, and doing some small utility scale projects as well. But today, of course, we'll be jumping into homeowner prepaid lease options, what they are, what they could mean for you, and really get into the weeds of it a little bit. And so we'll start off with how it works. So we'll talk about the basics of a one-time prepaid structure for a lease, what it covers for the installation and the long-term value. We'll talk about why homeowners might choose a prepaid lease, so that would be comparing it in terms of how it stacks up to just paying cash. Certainly using, what might be available in term financing, as well as looking at, term leasing options and how they compare there as well. We'll speak a little bit to who it tends to fit best. We'll talk about solar only, solar paired with a battery, or adding a battery to a system you might already have, as well as, of course, some of the qualifications that are required for you to be eligible for a prepaid lease. And then at the end, for what time we have, we'll answer some Q&A. We'll do some Q&A. So feel free to submit those questions into that section here in Zoom. I will be more than happy to answer as many questions as I can. If I can't answer a question for you, then we'll get the answer and get back to you as well. So we'll get right into it. So number one, how does it work? We'll talk about the prepaid lease and how that works. So the big thing is that instead of paying a monthly fee in terms of a long-term lease, or like you would maybe with a financing option, you're going to pay the full contract price across the same progress milestones as you would if you were paying cash for the system. So while it's not, purchasing the system in cash, it's sort of cash adjacent. And so, you're going to pay for the system in milestones, just as if you would if you were to be purchasing it in cash. Through Prepaid Energy. They are a partner available for that prepaid lease. They're going to require just a minimum $1,000 deposit to get started, and the remaining payments would more than likely be 35% at permit received, 45 at install, and the final 10% at activation. And so, it's not dissimilar from paying cash for a system that you might purchase. It's just a prepaid lease instead. But it is a lease, right? Not a purchase. And so Prepaid Energy, as the owner of the system, would be responsible for the life of the agreement for the upkeep of the system. And you as a homeowner would just be leasing the system and its benefits. So you'd be able to, of course, benefit from the electricity production from the solar, or just being able to use a battery if that were part of it as well. And so on that note, in terms of long-term upkeep, while most systems in general, if you already have solar, they don't need a ton of attention. There's no moving parts. Those things tend to keep working. If anything ever does come up, monitoring and maintenance coordination are already included within the lease, and they're actually the responsibility for that is entirely on the system owner, which would be, Prepaid Energy. So it's never something you'd have to be worried about paying for or managing, and it's just an extra layer of a peace of mind that there's someone else who's actually responsible for that maintenance and upkeep should anything come up. And we'll talk more about that as well. And so some of those things that are included for the life of the lease, 24/7 system monitoring. So while you as a homeowner would continue to have access to the monitoring of the system, Participate would also be able to remotely monitor the performance. They're going to track production. They can flag and potentially identify issues early, and that's at no additional cost for the term of the lease. That just means that if an issue were to come up, they could potentially flag it, identify it, raise it to you, and we can have it resolved quicker. They're also going to facilitate those core maintenance issues. So we'll talk about that. Performance guarantee, it's a big one. Obviously, for anyone who's worked with us, we guarantee performance. But the way that Participate does that is they are going to guarantee every single year over the 25-year term of the lease how your system is going to produce. And so that annual energy production is guaranteed. If it ever falls short, you're receiving a performance refund automatically. There's no request needed. It's just built into the lease. The next item is, maintenance coordination. Obviously, if someone were to purchase a system from us, we're going to support with warranty support. We're going to support with getting system items fixed. But again, the burden, the responsibility for that in a prepaid lease scenario is on Participate, the prepaid lease provider. And so if maintenance is ever needed, they're responsible for coordinating it with us. And that's never going to be at a cost to you. In terms of that warranty administration, again, manufacturer's warranties are there, they're available. They're just going to be administered by the system owner. So you as the homeowner aren't responsible for saying, I need to worry about this warranty or have to, see about having this taken care of. And again, we do much of that already, but this just provides a third party who's actually responsible, invested, owns the system, and therefore is going to be responsible for having that done. Again, it's really to be thought of more as a security blanket. Systems don't often require much maintenance at all, and most of what could come up would be covered under warranty. But anything that otherwise would need covering, or should it be over and above what the warranty covers, then it's going to be covered and be the responsibility of the prepaid lease provider. And so why do homeowners, why might they choose a prepaid lease, and who would it be a good fit for? How does it compare to some of the other options? And so to that point, there really are four ways, of course, that someone could pay for solar and a battery, or otherwise. And those four ways are, potentially purchased in cash. You could look at, taking out a loan, for which there, are attractive options, both for short term as well as longer terms that might be 20, 25 years. There is a term lease. We did a webinar probably a few months ago about LightReach and their term lease option. That's 25 years. It's 10 or 12 years on a battery, but that's available as well as a prepaid lease, which is, of course, what we're talking about. And so, in the cash system, the homeowner would own the system outright. They're not having to make any future payments for the ownership of that system. But that means the homeowner is ultimately handling it, the monitoring and maintenance directly with us, the installer. And more often than not, everything's covered under existing warranties should issues come up. But that means that otherwise the responsibility is on them. It's going to require an upfront investment, if you're purchasing a system in cash. But historically, of course, it's the lowest lifetime cost and the most savings that you're going to realize over that system life. In that scenario, your savings are beginning in day one, and they're just going to continue to grow as utility rates rise. Of course, that makes a lot of sense. You're sort of prepaying a portion of your electricity costs. We've seen, especially as material costs have come down, it's a really attractive way to move forward with the project and lock in that portion of your electricity. In terms of evaluating loan, those options have been available for some time. Homeowners are going to still own the system. They're just subject to loan terms. Homeowners going to handle monitoring and maintenance directly with the installer, just the same as if they purchased in cash. And they're just going to have a monthly payment associated with that system for what's typically a 20 or 25-year term. And with that, they're of course paying some interest. You can pay off at any time. There's no prepayment penalty or early payoff penalty. So that can be an attractive option as well. And those savings can begin day one. It just depends, how that payment really fits with what your current savings would look like. But ultimately, you're saving over the term of that period because you're paying a fixed amount for ownership of the system. that's saving you a certain amount of money, and that savings is going to increase over time as rates go up. And you at the end of the day, you own an asset, right? The term lease is a little bit different in that you don't own the system, right? So the system owner, the lease provider, is going to retain ownership. It's a 25-year lease for a solar or solar and battery system, 10 or 12-year lease for just a battery. The monitoring and maintenance is included. That's all going to be part of the lease with the lease provider. You see this word escalator, which is just to say that there are some term lease options that have what's called an escalator, that where the payment would go up a little bit year over year. The options we provide have no escalator, so the payment's fixed from day 1 to day 25 of your lease term. Your payment never increases. And some of the value adds of that term lease is that it actually can extend existing warranties on some of the equipment, namely a battery. So if you were to install a battery and do so within a term lease, since you're leasing that entire system through 25 years for a solar and battery system, then they're going to extend that battery warranty to 25 years. That essentially means when the time comes, if that battery were to fail in year 15, then they're going to replace that at their cost. So that's a value there as well. The term lease, one of the values to homeowners is just the payment is often lower than what it would otherwise be if they were to finance that same system. This means we've seen homeowners who are saving, as little as $30 a month from day 1 to as much as, $50, $60, $100 even in some cases, depending on the system, their home, and their electricity needs. And a future buyout option could be available for a term lease, but it's also entirely transferable. So if you were to sell your home, then you could transfer it as well, and that might be the more attractive thing to do if possible. That gets us to, of course, the prepaid lease, in which case again, the system owner, the lease provider, is going to own the system or retain ownership of the system for the term. Monitoring and maintenance coordination is included. It's never going to be an additional cost to you. And it's like a cash purchase in that the system cost is paid in full over milestones. It's not financed over years. There's no interest. There's no monthly bill coming. And your savings on your utility bill can start right away. So you also are going to be able to see those savings right away. The return is going to be probably most favorable. And you also will have the option to actually buy the system out starting in year 6. You can also transfer that prepaid lease agreement if you were to sell as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that buyout option because I think that's really significant. It's a potentially huge value to the prepaid lease. And we'll talk about that here more in a moment. So let's talk first about a real world example. So we talked about who it could make sense for, and it quickly, I think, should introduce the question of, well, but why would it make sense? What about it makes sense from a financial perspective for me, for someone evaluating a system on their home? And so what we have here is just an example, right? So this would be a world where we might be looking at, say, about an average rooftop solar system, about 10 kW with, say, a Tesla Powerwall 3, which is a popular option. That might be an average system that could get installed. On the left here, you can see the prepaid lease, the price of that system through that option, where you've got, what might be about a baseline, a ballpark figure of about $26,000. Whereas if you were to have purchased that same system in the past, you're looking at a cash purchase. And this is independent of any incentives that might have been available in the past. This would have just been a gross system cost. Then you might have anticipated that system would cost about $36,000. Now, some people might say, well, I'd like to own this system. Okay, great. Well, you could certainly look at a cash purchase. You can look at, a loan option. But what we're really looking at today is just on the surface, comparing apples to apples. If you were to lease that same system in a prepaid lease scenario, what is your potential savings that are available to you? And so we can see here that you'd have access to about what here amounts to about $10,000 in lower costs. And so that's just by nature of the structure of going through the prepaid lease. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Now, what happens at the end of the term? So we talked a little bit about, okay, so I'm leasing this system, but I've paid this amount, similar to if I were purchasing it in cash. And what can I expect over the remainder of the term? So you have really three options at the end of that term. So, and again, that term is for a solar and battery system or just solar system, 25 years. Whereas if it were just for the battery, the term of that is for 10 years. And so if you were looking at your options, they would be one, to renew. So if you reached into that term, then you can say, I'd like to just continue the lease. Well, at that point, because you're extending beyond the initial 25 or 10-year period, you would renew the agreement for additional terms and then have a current fair market rental rate that they would give you. New lease basically with that existing system. Your second option would just be to purchase the system, and that can happen anytime after that 6-year anniversary. And we'll talk a little bit more about what to expect from that purchase option here in a moment. And then your third would be to just conclude the lease. Say, I'm done. I've gotten 25 years or 10 years out of my system. I'm satisfied with what it did for me, but I don't need it anymore. Or I'd like to evaluate a new system and with a new lease, new equipment. At which time, to terminate the agreement, the system owner will arrange for the system removal, and that's entirely at their cost if you were to elect to do that. And so those would be the three options for the end of the term of the lease. And so let's talk a little bit more now about this early purchase option, because this is really, I think, critical to the value of what this option might provide for someone. And so, it labels it here built-in flexibility, right? So this is a voluntary path to ownership. It's on your terms and it starts in year 6, but it's never required. You're never required to take ownership. And so what that looks like is starting in year 6, on the 6-year anniversary of your install and every year thereafter, or anytime after year 6, if you are selling your home with 30 to 90 days notice, you have the ability to purchase the system. And so what does that look like? You're going to be presented with a fair market value, which is offset by the value of any remaining obligations owed to you. So that's very intentional language. We'll talk about that a little bit more on my next slide. But this balance will never be less than $0. So they say that because it is possible that the remaining obligations owed to you could result in a negative valuation, in which case they're not going to pay you. But it may result in a 0 or low incremental cost to purchase. And so that price floor is just set to $0. So you're going to be presented fair market value less what they otherwise would owe you in terms of value for the system that you've not yet realized over the life, in which case you may very well see that, hey, it's $0. You can take ownership. So what that looks like. If for some reason they were to present you, hey, here's the fair market value and the purchase option, and it's going to come at some amount of cost, and you say, oh, well, I don't really agree with that, then you can request a third-party appraisal at Participate Energy's cost, or you can continue the lease as is and revisit the buyout later. Again, there's no requirement that you take ownership of the system. So if they presented a cost to you, let's say it was $1,000. Hey, you can take ownership, it's $1,000. You can say, I'll wait till next year. Maybe it'll be $0 then. So that's just to say that, and I use just a figure there that's abstract, but if that were to be the case, you don't have to take ownership. And so that's just to say, again, 0 obligation, full flexibility. Purchasing is entirely optional, and selling your home doesn't force a buyout either, because you can actually transfer the lease freely to the new homeowner if you'd rather not. And because this is a prepaid lease and you're paying for the lease up front, you are not going to be subject to credit requirements. And so it should be standard, straightforward transfer of ownership to the next buyer of your home. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how that buyout is calculated, because I think, again, while we talked about it before, I just want to make sure we're really clear here on the value that you can potentially benefit from. So the way that they determine your purchase price is that they're going to look at fair market value. So at the time of your inquiry, the system is professionally assessed to determine its current fair market value. Then they're going to look at the remaining obligations owed to you. And so we saw that language before. What they really mean by that is that when you've prepaid a lease, you've paid for 25 years of that system's performance, or 10 years for the battery's performance. And within that, we saw they guaranteed a certain level of performance from the system during that time. And so when you've prepaid for the system's performance over that period, then what we're talking about is that the system owner already owes you for that production if you don't choose to realize it over the term. And so instead of writing a separate check, it's just simply subtracted from your buyout price. And that is why you'd actually pay to buy the system never less than $0, because it may very well result in a less than zero value, but they're going to default to $0 if that's the case. It's possible it could be a low cost, right? We can't say that it won't be. So, zero to low incremental cost is what you would be left with in a purchase price option. But again, if you were to be presented with a cost and weren't satisfied with it, you might determine, hey, there's no benefit to me taking ownership of this system. Of course, you can continue to just see out the term of lease at no additional cost. All right, so who does it tend to fit best? We're going to shift gears here a little bit. We're going to talk about who it works for, as well as just some of the requirements within the program. So there are three common situations. The first is that you're just interested in solar only. You don't have solar on your home yet. You want to start saving money. You're looking for potentially the lowest lifetime cost to be able to do that. Then homeowners exploring solar for the first time can be a great fit for this. They don't want to perhaps worry about upkeep of the system. They're not concerned with having ownership in the immediacy, but they might be curious about the ability to take ownership in the future. Solar and battery, it's a great means to be able to capitalize, again, the lowest lifetime cost of ownership, not ownership, I should say yet, but, benefiting at the lowest lifetime cost of benefiting from the system. Homeowners installing both solar and battery together from the start, where you're going to get the savings of the solar alongside, the backup potential of the battery. But also it's available, as I've said, to add to an existing solar system. So if you wanted to add battery to your existing solar, then that would be eligible as well. It is important to say that if you already have a battery, unfortunately, you could not use a prepaid lease to add an additional battery to your system. So that's important to say as well. And ultimately, if you're adding a battery, you'll see this line at the bottom here. Not all equipment configurations are going to qualify automatically, and that we're going to need to work with Participate to ensure that we're designing a system that's going to ultimately comply with their approved equipment list. And I'll probably take a moment to talk more about that a little bit later on here as well. So let's just take a quick look at some of the requirements they have on the eligibility side. This was, I guess, as a preface, just approved. This has been available in other states across the country for it's probably coming up on a year now. It was only recently approved in North Carolina, just going through the legislative process, going through the Utilities Commission. It was finally approved probably about a month ago. But in terms of eligibility, the property has to be located in an eligible North Carolina service area. It has to be on Duke Energy. So at this time, it's not available to anyone who's on a municipal co-op. It's not available to anyone who might be in our service territory that's in South Carolina at this time. We do anticipate it'll get approved in South Carolina in the coming months. The homeowner, of course, must own the property. It could be in an approved trust or LLC structure. That's something we'd have to navigate with them. But they own the property, right? The property has to be on a residential utility rate, which shouldn't be an issue. The roof has to be in good condition and an eligible roof type. They can work on asphalt shingle. We can, comply within their guidelines on standing seam, other metal roof surfaces. We have some homeowners who are on flat roof surfaces here in the Carolinas. Some of those are within their eligibility, some are not. So it's just something we need to review. And it just has to be a single family home or an eligible detached or townhome structure. And that's just something, again, we just want to make sure we go through the process of making sure it's approved. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, and this is where we come in as your local installer, is the equipment does have to come from a specified and approved product list to be eligible for the prepaid lease to participate. And so we have access to those products. We're familiar with what's on those lists. So we can make sure that when we're designing a system for you, if this is a product and pathway program you're interested in, that we're using products that are eligible, going to comply, and ultimately, again, allow you to take advantage of this option. And so, again, if you're not sure, hey, if this is good for me, if my home would qualify, if I meet all these parameters, that's what our Q&A for. That's what reaching out to our team is for, and I'll have contacts for that in a moment as well. Awesome. Well, cool. Again, I can't thank you all enough for joining. Great group for this webinar. I really appreciate having the opportunity to cover, what we think is going to be an exciting product for people to, again, potentially realize the lowest cost path to go solar or add a battery or have solar and a battery on their home. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, please reach out. We'd be happy to help evaluate the options. Yeah, thanks again. Y'all have a good one. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.